The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome to the show. We've got myself, Steven Sakach. We've got Tullio Siragusa and Maher. Let's get rolling. So at the time we're recording this, we've just gotten through the holiday season. And for many people, that brings up a range of emotions, good and bad. The past several years, those family get-togethers have been especially tricky to navigate. You've got the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, brothers and sisters coming to the dinner table, and they're all sitting down with all the different opinions, all that past history, and suddenly the table starts turning into the airing of grievances, right? And then that turkey on the table ends up being stuffed with resentment. And so that's our topic today. It's resentment. And it's a connection killer. It's an empathy killer. It's a productivity killer. And maybe if you pay close attention, there might be a business idea in there somewhere along the line. So we're going to talk about a couple hugely successful companies that were started off of that idea of resentment and turning a company's pain point into an advantage and an opportunity. But first, Tullio Nash, when you think of that sort of work-related resentment scenario, what are you picturing? Tullio, let's start with you.
Well, I'm picturing this sense of feeling really disempowered, really tied to what I call the ultimate victim consciousness, feeling like you've been wronged. There's a great sense of injustice that you experience. And I've been there more than once. And all it does is just consumes that. You show up to work and that's all you can think about is how that person did this or that to you, or how they wronged you. And it just keeps eating at you, and to the point where it almost feels debilitating. And but it's just an awful feeling. You just don't feel your full self, and you don't feel motivated. You're just kind of going through the motion. And not exactly the kind of, exciting feeling you would want to have showing up at work and being a contributor. So just not a good feeling all around.
Yeah, I think that word, like unfairness that you said, is really one of the keys to how, resentment starts. It's something where there's just some bit of injustice or unfairness in there. Ash, what about you? What kind of scenario you picture?
I have to piggyback off that a couple of words there. One, injustice, debilitation. Those are the feelings that you feel. But typically, I have a thought process here that it comes from feeling threatened in your environment as well. If you have an environment that's focused on the results you drive for that business, and you feel that everyone ties you to that result, and let's just say hypothetically speaking, you're not maybe achieving those results, but someone else is. When feelings of envy, jealousy start to come about because you're creating an environment where people's values determined on what they can produce. Well, now you have an environment. Now you're playing with fire a little bit, right? Because that person that, has a positive attention, you may look at them negatively because you already feel threatened in your space regardless. So going back to those feelings that can come from that debilitation, that feeling of unfairness, you feeling that victimhood mentality, all that really typically stems from a feeling of just not feeling safe in your environment.
Yeah, what reminds me, I had some friends that came to me recently who were going through this problem where they had the sort of work life, family life issues where they couldn't find that right balance. So I picture like a working mom who's at work, and she's, wants to advance and do all those things, and at the same time has obligations to the family. And so the family sometimes may feel pulled apart, or if she goes home and someone else isn't pulling their weight, right, and they're depending on her to do too much in addition to her career, or you picture her friends who have the job of being a mother, but don't also have a career like her, and they want to do X, Y, and Z. And I just picture like there's a whole bunch of ways that dynamic can come to play. And I had some friends who were kind of going through that, where there's that sort of tug of war of that unfairness, in parenting and things like that, and how it had some impact on work, or how the work came home with them. So it's definitely this balance. That scenario just comes to mind just because it happened recently with some of my friends. Ash, what's interesting to me is there's some neuroscience on the topic of resentment. What have you found on that?
So really, really great question. So this is actually an article found on PubMed Central, the National Center for Biotechnology and Information, where it talks about resentment appearing to deactivate the empathy circuits in the brain, shrinking perspective taking. So talk about that example when you're put in a position where you're already resentful of your environment, you're already feeling threatened, you're thinking to yourself, well, how can I save myself? In environments like that, you can imagine when someone feels threatened, if there's an environment for them that could pull them out of that situation, the loyalty within the organization is not even there anymore. Because why would they feel that way when the empathy isn't tied? It's already removed, right? They don't want to see the other side because they already feel super threatened by the environment. So really interesting that there's an entire article in Science about this. And when you talk about the circuit turning off, it makes it really hard to guide an entire organization to follow an aligned vision when you think about it.
Yeah, and so that in that study, it showed like there were lower levels of serotonin and higher cortisol, and so these neurochemicals come into play there, and it's actually resentment appears to deactivate those parts of the brain that are responsible for empathy. So to me, that's kind of fascinating in that there's actual physical things going on here if you're holding on to that resentment, and it makes it harder for you to do the things you want to do, makes it harder to have gratitude or to empathize with others.
When you talk about higher cortisol as well, dealing with stress and the stressful situations that come to day to day, when someone has a nervous breakdown, you can only imagine are the grievances in the workplace are also contributing to that nervous breakdown, and the fact that your chemicals aren't being regulated the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. If you think about emotional intelligence, the ultimate expression of that is being completely in control of your emotions, no matter what's going on. And coming from a place of total Zen, where you just intelligently know how to move through whatever's happening. The opposite happens when resentment kicks in, because you feel, number one, like you've been taken advantage of. Number two, you feel the sense of expectation that hasn't been met. And also you just feel like unappreciated. And that's like the opposite of operating at an emotionally intelligent level. You start to actually activate more of a sort of a primordial primitive mindset, which is a survival instinct. And, that basically almost dumbs us down, literally dumbs us down in terms of our ability to get anything done, because it just overtakes you. It's awful, just awful.
So let's look at what are the things that we can control ourselves, when dealing with this, some of these causes. Let's talk about those. Tullio, what comes to mind as far as causes for resentment? I know we talked a little bit about that, but let's dive in there a little bit deeper so we can spot some of those.
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity, if anyone who's watching, has experienced resentment or is going through it right now and is feeling like, how do I get out of this? The number one thing to keep in mind is it is a form of victim consciousness. So that means it's a choice that we are making. No one's making it for us. We're making that choice to feel like someone's got power over us. And be that as it may, even in a business dynamic where someone might have more power because of their position, the fact that we allow that power over our being, that's a choice that we're making, whether we're aware of it or not. So it really comes down to understanding that I do have a choice. I am not going to give away my power. I am going to maintain my agency. And in doing so, I'm not going to allow a circumstance outside of myself to dictate how I operate and how I live. And that's a really easy thing to say, but it's a very difficult thing to do. And it takes practice and time. I have found the biggest contributor to letting go of resentment for me was learning to letting go of expectations. The minute I let go of expecting someone to give me something or to make something happen for me is the moment I could flow through a disrespect or someone overlooking you or not showing proper appreciation, whatever, all those list items that we might have. The minute I let go of the expectation, I can't be impacted by it because I didn't expect some outcome that I could be disappointed that didn't happen, which would cause me to be resentful. And that takes incredible self-awareness and self-discipline to get to that place. But that is truly a liberating way to let go and not be in a place where you live with resentment. It's also about learning forgiveness. And the principle of forgiveness is, again, not about the other person. It's about you letting go of the power you've given to someone else over you. And that just takes time and practice and a lot of self-awareness.
That is really, really hard to do too. But it is something that's in your control, right? It's something that you can do, but it's really difficult. Hey, Ash, you're about to leave work. It's like 10 minutes left. Someone dumps a bunch of work on you, or someone else wants you to help with something. How are you feeling right then? This happens. Let's say it's the third time this week.
Well, it just depends on how I'm feeling in the environment I'm working with, right? If I feel there's a ton of goodwill in the environment, let's say, for example, those same individuals that are dumping that work on my lap are individuals that have allowed me to dump work on their lap, and that reciprocity is attached and built into our system, where we do have that genuine connection, love, and collaborative help that we want to be able to provide each other. I'm willing to do the additional work, yes. But when I'm feeling unappreciated, for example, a bunch of work is being dropped, and I'm maybe feeling that the person's duping me. Maybe maybe the environment is an environment that is focused around how valuable you are in terms of production. Maybe that work is getting in the way of you having to complete other tasks that you have. Yes, then I am feeling greatly frustrated and resentful. So those are the kinds of feelings. But those are two different scenarios, right? When there's reciprocity attached to it, goodwill, I'm more than happy to stay an extra minute because I know that my colleague will do the same for me. When I feel I'm getting duped or my colleague won't do the same for me, no, I am resentful. There's a definite agreements in that conversation.
Mm.
So I think as a leader, there are a couple of areas where I know I have to deal with resentment. And so you might have some sort of unresolved conflict that's going on. You can't let those sit. So if I've got, say, one employee training another and the training's just not going so well, the person doing the training is getting frustrated with the other, things go over the line a little bit. You get both people coming to you saying, hey, can you address this issue? Well, if I'm just sitting here and I'm putting it off for, I'll get to it. But it becomes a week, it becomes a month or something. And, nothing ever gets addressed. Then you're going to have that resentment just kind of fester in there, right? It's not getting addressed. And then meanwhile, Ash just got dumped on because this employee hasn't been up to speed on something and he's getting overworked. And now he's in the dynamic like, hey, when is, this person going to get up to speed? And so you can have things like that where if you don't address something, as a leader, this stuff can just kind of spread and it can work its way through the company in different ways. And you have to be really careful. The other area I think of is broken promises. So for me, that would be like, I'm going to get to it. I say that, but I don't get to it, right? Or ever. They'll be like, okay. Or, hey, we're going to get this software and then, it's going to solve all your problems. And then it's a month, 2 months, 3 months. Doesn't happen ever. Then, people start having that resentment issue with that. So to solve some of that, you just have to really communicate. I get it. Finances change, things change. You're being pulled in all directions as leaders and stuff changes, right? But if you're making some sort of promises, you've got to communicate if something changes and you got to really communicate well. Otherwise, you're going to have that resentful employees. And then what happens? Burnout, right? They're just going to get tired of doing that. That unwelcome work just becomes just another straw piling up.
Yeah.
So thinking about this, let's go a little deeper on the solution side of this. Ash, I know, so in that scenario where we talked about that unwelcome work, we have some things we do in our agency where we do have recognition. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the Bliss system, we are building love into scalable systems, which is an amazing system I have in place. Essentially, everything that we do for each other is recognized in some fashion through either an encouragement. We have our system called Bliss Bucks, where we're then able to send over Bliss Bucks as an appreciation for either an experience, a help in a task, or something that brings you feel a sense of appreciation that person is recognizing and appreciating for the work you're doing, but putting it out there for the world to see, or in this case, our internal organization to see the goodwill that's being built across each other. When you're seeing that, you're inspired to want to continue to help, because you're seeing that there's an entire culture of people encouraging each other and showing and expressing their appreciation for each other. So again, it makes it so much easier when there's 10 minutes left of work and I'm about to leave and my colleague asks me for help, knowing that they're not asking me because they want to cut corners. They sincerely need that help. And because I'm completely trusting of that everybody has this goodwill towards each other, I feel more compelled knowing, okay, hey, you know what? I am going to do this because I know that person's going to remember that as well. And then we send each other thanks for it. And we take it even further. We're not only working good consciousness towards each other internally, but externally with the clients we work with. Our thanks program is something that's phenomenal. Being able to have a conversation that is positive at both ends and feeling good about that conversation, and then being able to offer our clients a cup of coffee, thanking them for the effort that they're putting in, holding themselves accountable to the goals that we have in place. Because at the end of the day, it's a partnership. So both of those, the Bliss system that we have and our thanks system, has really built a lot of goodwill internally and externally.
Yeah, so let's talk about this a little bit. So for me, if you're in that leadership position and I'm the only one who's like giving out recognition, I'm the only torchbearer in there. That's just one torch, right? And maybe I've got management and you've got 2 or 3, 4 people, and now you've got 4 torches, that's only so much light. But if you can get it to where you've got, like you're talking about, our peer-to-peer giving situation, where it's just people giving recognition to each other and it's done, through Slack, and you see that it's very public. Now you've got 40, 50, however many people all carrying a torch for this recognition. And then, it's the light is much brighter on that, trust me. And it's not all the weight on me, and I'm not going to do as good a job anywhere near having, all the people in the company involved in this. And I think that's just such a huge point to make, is that if you can kind of systemize some of this, it's going to make it a lot easier. Another thing we do is in our staff meetings, weekly, one of the first things we're doing is talking about gratitude for something that someone had done for us, earlier in the week. It's like, hey, I just wanted to thank Tullio for stepping in, and helping out with. So it's this very public gratitude that I think is key, so that you don't have that, hey, yeah, no, I bent over backwards and no one cares, kind of attitude. And you keep the teamwork involved, which is really important to us. Tullio.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think
I was going to say it simply just validates that goodwill is the metric that we're going after. So when you're seeing all of this goodwill, you're encouraged. I mean, from an employee's perspective, I feel empowered to want to help my clients, because that is built into our system. And I apologize for interrupting.
The good news is, I spoke earlier about having agency, self-agency, but the job of a good leader is to remove friction inside of an organization. And so you can systemize an environment, a culture where resentment doesn't even happen. Because usually it happens because expectations aren't met, as we've discussed, or people don't feel appreciated, or they get passed up. They don't have a voice. There's so many things we've already discussed, but you can systemize an environment, a culture, where you're dealing with the root cause, because clearing a resentment with someone is one thing, and there's ways to do that, but actually creating a culture where resentments never actually surface, because there's a sense of equivalence, there's a sense of collaboration, there's an openness, There's a genuine, authentic way of being with each other, as we talked about in our previous podcast. There's no need to be duplicitous. You just yourself all the time. And so I think leaders could do a lot to create an environment where they proactively allow dialogue and create dialogue among people, and honest conversation. And if things come up, they're dealt with immediately between two people who lovingly are trying to maintain this collaborative culture. So it becomes a bigger picture for everyone to maintain that culture, because we all value it. And that's really the only way it works very effectively. But that requires a lot. It requires putting measurements in place to keep that kind of culture alive. Even in some cases, KPIs that the leadership can keep themselves honest to make sure proactively that culture is being promoted. It doesn't just happen automatically.
Yeah, I think you have to build this environment of trust, right? So if you've got this environment of trust, then people are going to be a little more free to speak their minds about stuff and do it in a productive way. Because you can't, you want candor in your business, right? You need that. You need people bringing counterpoints, up. You need that, instead of it being you mentioned friction. You have this in a productive manner. And one of the easy ways to do that is if I'm bringing an idea up to the table, I'm then encouraging it. Like I'm saying, hey guys, here's what I think. What's wrong with my idea, right? What could we do there? And let's poke some holes into this. So you've got this sort of environment where it's a little bit free flowing and everyone's got their opinions on things. You don't want to stifle that, because people are worried about, causing a fight or something like that. And I think one of the guiding lights for us and for me personally in my life is making connection a goal. And I'm just going to say that probably 1,000 times, but if connection is that guiding light, then you're going to have a more skillful approach when you're talking with someone. It's like, maybe Tullio and I had differing opinions on something, but I'm not going to be angry about it. We're just going to, get to the point, because connections are going to be our goal. We're just be like, yeah, I want to hear you. I'm going to repeat back what you said to make sure you're heard. And then here's my viewpoint on that. And Tullio is going to do the same, and we're going to have a productive conversation. So, but if you don't have that trust, you don't have that freedom in the workplace, you're going to lose some of that diversity of thought. And that's just so vital in your business evolution. So yeah, go for it too.
Go ahead, Ash.
So and I want to play a little bit, I want to play the role of the CEO who's going to play devil's advocate a bit regarding environments like sales environments where you're reliant on hitting specific numbers. And that essentially brings in a pool of individuals that are typically more cutthroat because they feel that their only value within the organization, their safety net, is how much they're able to produce. So that you could imagine that, in environments like that, typically people have less patience for one another. And, and the stress that comes in with trying to hit numbers and thinking that someone else might be taking that from them and so on and so forth. How do you balance it out with having connection, having people feel safe that, their job isn't just tied to them, even though it is, right? But how do you create an environment where you could have that collaboration, that connection, emotional connection, well-being from one another, knowing, but at the end of the day, that your value is tied to how much revenue you generate for a company?
This is such a key thing because I've experienced both. And unfortunately, sales gets the reputation that you have to be this sort of cutthroat hunter, go-getter, at all costs, step on anyone to get your way, right? But that's actually not a reflection of sales. That's a reflection of the culture in which a lot of sales organizations have been operating under that have given sales that rap, right? So it's got nothing to do with sales as it is the culture. So if it's a culture that is not about connection, as Steven mentioned, then it's going to revert back to the most common denominator. My value is based on what I produce. But if it's a culture that's based and predicated on bliss, on love and empathy, then you can collectively and collaboratively drive growth and revenue and profits. As we mentioned in our previous podcast, you can get up to a 1,600% return if you're operating under this kind of empathetic mindset. So the truth of the matter is you can actually achieve greater success in sales in an empathetic environment than you do in a cutthroat environment. And everyone feels good about showing up to work at the same time. It's a win-win all around. But without that understanding and that knowledge, most organization will divert back to, this is what's worked for many years. But the reality is it doesn't work. It has never worked. The opposite, collaboration, caring for each other, supporting each other, that's proven to actually outperform anything else.
Yeah, I think you can have those revenue performance goals, but you can also have these leading indicator KPIs that are sort of not, bottom line revenue numbers. It's like, just prior to this meeting, we were with my growth team and we were literally just going through some of those statistics on the peer-to-peer giving, some of those statistics on our customer giving, the gratitude to customers. And these are like, these are not at all what you consider maybe the hard and fast, revenues, but we know these are important KPIs for us. And we know they're going to be a KPI that's going to lead and support these other KPIs in the process. So you can definitely make certain things like that in your company, have these sort of soft KPIs, I guess, versus, always focused on that bottom line. And like Tullio pointed out, what's going to happen is once you get all these all lined up, you are going to see revenue growth and things like that go along with it. But it's just a matter of first identifying and valuing those before, anything else, and not just sticking always so focused on what that bottom line is. So, I mean, Tullio, if I'm going to the board on a company and I'm saying, hey, here's our employee satisfaction numbers, how often is this happening in a boardroom anywhere?
The day that boards have a committee for employee satisfaction is the day when things will have shifted dramatically in the corporate world. And if you're watching this, I highly encourage it. You have committees that deal with client satisfaction, that deal with profitability, with compensation committees. But, why not have a committee that deals with employee satisfaction? Because that actually will tell you how well leaders are treating people. The numbers, you can achieve the numbers and be a tyrant, right? And you end up having a lot of turnover as a result of that. That doesn't always make it to the board. But the indicator of the satisfaction of the employees, how well they feel engaged or taken care of, that's going to tell you a lot about the leadership. Are they leaders who operate with emotional intelligence? Are they empathetic leaders? Or are they tyrant, which ultimately will spread into the marketplace too, and how clients are dealt with. So having board level conversations around employee satisfaction, it's due time. There are some who do it, and those who do it do extraordinarily well, but not enough. And I think there's an opportunity for making improvement there.
Hey, I mean, we're going to our doctor and we're getting our blood work done, right? We need like the corporate version of your blood work. And if you're not doing that kind of analysis on these different areas, the lab's going to come back someday and show you, hey, your resentment levels are this high, through the roof because you weren't paying attention to this, and this. So you've got to, have this sort of open feedback channels and things like that, and KPIs that you can develop related to that, and not just, stop at HR with that. Bring that straight up, like you said, to the board if you can. So any other closing thoughts on that? I know.
I think the other thing to think about is what leaders can do is enable models where there could be a way to clear resentments. I'm borrowing from, I was part of a men's circle for over a decade, mostly devoted to helping men be less toxic and more caring and loving, better parents, better husbands, etc. And often things would come up resentments easily would come up. But we actually had an exercise every week before we started a meeting. You can clear a resentment with someone. You would stand in front of them, put your hand on their heart, and say, "This is what happened. This is what you did, and this is how it made me feel." So it wasn't accusatory of saying, "This is what you did, and this is what you made me feel." This is what you did, and this is how I felt. So it was taking accountability for your own feelings, but letting them know what they did. In many cases, they didn't even know they did that, right? It's like, I had no idea I even did that. But it was an opportunity to be heard. And in fact, if you were receiving the feedback, you were to say nothing. You're just there to help that individual clear that resentment so that they can not have to live with it in their own heads all week long. And it was a loving provision where now I could be present in a meeting and not be thinking about, I really hate that guy. They did this to me. So in many organizations, if you don't create an environment where employees can clear resentment with each other, you end up having disconnected people who are sitting in a meeting and not paying attention because they're, just steaming inside. So anyway, there's companies that have done this. I know Booz Allen actually has these kind of check-ins and these clearings that they do amongst their teams. And I was blown away to hear that because they're one of the best management consulting companies in the world. Maybe there's something to be borrowed there for other organizations. But either way, you've got to have a model where people can clear these resentments with each other and doing it in a way that's loving and compassionate.
Yeah, and I think if you've got that connection as a goal and empathy as a goal within your organization, people will pay attention to those conversations a little bit more, and you'll allow them to see your perspective, right? And then I also want to see your perspective, and you kind of make that as a goal. You can have conversations like that, with your employees, with a team. It's not that hard. It sounds a little difficult, but it's really not that hard. Just being a little bit vulnerable yourself, even as a leader, you're going to allow your employees be a little vulnerable as well. And what happens is you get that deeper connection in that process.
And I have to add just the implications of not doing that and not having that connection. Imagine when something is festering for so long and you're trying to retain employees. That's an opportunity for your competitors or for another organization to pick up employees that actually do want to have that connection. And when you allow things to fester, you can only imagine when an opportunity arises for that pain to be relieved and possibly just in changing environments, that employee may take that opportunity. So you're also hurting yourself in the long run in terms of retention and building a long-standing culture.
Yeah, that's a great point, and transitions kind of into the next topic I want to talk about is that, yeah, if you've got something like that resentment issue and it's just lingering out there, either someone can use that to their advantage to become a competitor, or they can leave the company, start their own business doing it. There's a lot of different ways something like that can go sideways for you. So I think of the story of the big one, which was the founder of Netflix before Netflix began had rented a video. And back in the old days, you had the Blockbuster and you had these independent video stores, and the real anxiety was that you had to get them back, in time, or you're going to have these late fees pile up. And so he ended up with a $40 late fee. And he's like, there's got to be a better model than this. And so they kind of switched how they did things. Late fees, there's an importance of those in the business, was that you'd get your movie back so you could rent it to someone else, right? Yeah, it's also a revenue producer, but it's also, you've got to move your titles and let more people have them. And so with Netflix, they decided, hey, why don't we just do a subscription model, and you can take the movie, but you just won't get another one until you return that one. And so there's no stress. Watch it when you can, and then return it. And so this whole concept was based on just that little bit of resentment of having this late fee. And, the rest is history as far as building a competitor that wasn't there before. I also think of my mother going through sort of a similar thing. Just, she was a smaller woman. She had polio when she was younger, and the operation, she, was about never be over 5 feet tall. And, she struggled with that. And I remember her going to a job, and she lost this job because there was, this woman who could wear heels and do all these other things, and that just stuck with her. And then later she got angrier when they came back to her and they were like, we want you to be on our board. And she's like, well, you like me for my mind, but not this other position. That just made her angrier. And so this is why she started up her business, and it became this hugely successful publishing company. That's probably a story for another time, where she was selling 1 million books a year, not even through bookstores. But so it's this little bit of resentment, those kind of things can steamroll and kind of come back to you, or be an advantage for a competitor, or be an advantage for you. If you can spot that opportunity where there's resentment that comes to play, that can be a whole business idea.
Just to add to that, you have to imagine that resentment could be the fire starter for an individual who is motivated to do great things, right? And you could work and collaborate with that person and leverage their skills for your own industry, or you can create someone who's motivated to get out of the situation they're in and become something, better than what their current environment has to give them, right? So a quick story on my end was, a lot of the skills and advertising skills I gained today came from that example, where I was so fed up with my environment, my past employer, and even some elements of me, possibly some information being sprinkled around that I couldn't even accomplish certain things, where I was like, you know what, I could choose the victim mentality and say, I am not good enough and I'm just going to be upset about it, or I'm going to go try to find a better opportunity to create my own opportunity. And in doing so, it led me to the place I am in today. So in the case of the example of Netflix, it ended up becoming a fire starter that changed history and changed their business. And that was great. But can you imagine, had Blockbuster or these other companies who wanted to have that emotional connection and eliminated that piece of resentment, they could have leveraged that information and still been working or been in business today. Or you could have collaborated with that person that started their own company and ended up becoming your annoying competitor. And, that could have been someone you could have partnered with into the future. So those are the kinds of examples you have to imagine that you're missing out on opportunity.
Yep. So let's recap here a little bit what we've talked about. We learned that there's some neuroscience behind this, right? Where empathy is kind of an issue when you've got this resentment in there, where you can't feel the empathy that you were wanting to feel or had been feeling, or it's harder for you to have the gratitude that you had, just because you've got this resentment and it's festering and it's piling up and it's taking your energy there. So there's some actual neuroscience behind there. There's things you've got to do to get past some of that. You've got to let go, for sure. Things you can control. You can control also how you communicate as a company, so that you're got this policy of making connection and building trust is, one of the things that's really important to you, and it's a practice. And then you can pay attention, like we said, pay attention to your business, pay attention to the blood work of your business. What's that resentment level coming back on? Otherwise, this could be an opportunity for someone else, or pay attention to your competitors, because it can be an opportunity for you. Anything else we wanted to talk about before we head into the next show?
We can keep talking on this for hours.
Yeah, we could. I think I guarantee we're probably going to have 2 or 3 follow-ups where we go deeper into this.
Just touch the surface.
I know. And we didn't even having a gratitude practice is one of the things that's really going to help people through some of these issues of resentments. And that's a whole another show or two, but we'll get to it. So yeah, let's talk about the next episode. And we want to get into talking about small talk and how it's often a wasted opportunity, particularly in client facing or sales roles. I mean, it does have a purpose. I get it. It's that welcome mat for the deeper conversation. You're at the door, you want to get invited in and have a deeper conversation, deeper connection with someone. But too often we're just standing there at the door without moving beyond that. I mean, let's quit the small talk. It's boring. I get it. I don't want to know the weather forecast across the country for the next 5 days, including the wind speed and the humidity levels. Great. That's great. Can we get to something deeper when we've got those extra few minutes of that Zoom meeting that haven't even started up yet? So the next episode, we're going to talk about how we can connect on a deeper level, change your personal relationships for the better, improve your client relationships, help with networking. It'll help with customer loyalty too. And it can also create better relationships with your colleagues. And if you can do that, you're going to enjoy life so much more. So join us in the next podcast as we talk about the importance